the South Island of New Zealand, from Ship Cove to Bluff, 1,300 kilometers, across mountains, rivers, valleys, ridgelines, roots, rocks, and more. On the 18th of November at 7:45 am, I was in the harbour of Picton, ready to leave for Ship Cove, where the South Island's Te Araroa starts. On the boat, I met 2 Kiwi girls and a German guy, all in my age, doing the same thing, the South Island's Te Araroa. We enjoyed the boat ride through the beautiful Queen Charlotte Sound and arrived at Ship Cove a bit more than 1 hour after we left Picton. It was a beautiful day for hiking, not too hot nor too cold. So the first hike of Te Araroa trail is over. It was about 26 kilometers today, all the way from Ship Cove down here to Camp Bay campsite. Took us about 7 hours. By us, I mean Henrik and me. Henrik is a German guy I met today on the boat. He had quite bad blisters, I believe, so we were rather slow, but we reached our target here, and I do believe it's quite beautiful. I think it's a good place to spend the night. As Henrik got up and started to treat his blisters, I went for a quick swim in the sea in a beautiful scenery. The sun had just come out and dried me quickly. We started to hike at around 9:30 am. We didn't have enough water at the beginning. In the afternoon we struggled with the opposite problem. We had too much water, rain. As we arrived at Cowshed Bay, we were soaked and cold. I realized I needed a new rain jacket. The 25th of November 2018. Today is an important day. After 5 days of resupply, I finally get out on the first real part of TA, heading for the Richmond Range. Most of the trail was across farmland, only at the end through a beautiful forest and across a suspension bridge. Shortly after, we arrived at the campsite, which featured a river to swim in. Of course, it started to rain. The next day, Henrik and I hiked about 22 kilometers to Captain's Creek Hut. The densely woven roots embedded in green fern made the scene look very pretty. The cold fog which rose out of the woods on the other side of the valley added to the magic of this place. When I arrived, I was soaked in sweat, so I prepared dry clothes and a towel, took off my sweaty clothes and went for a swim in the nearby river. Huts are awesome. I slept very well last night. We left the hut at around 9 am, my plan being to reach Hackett Hut 23 kilometers away, with an 850 meters climb in between. I reached Midi Creek Hut very quickly and felt quite strong, so I kept pushing, the sweat like rivers running down my body. I drank about 5 liters, but started to feel very weak. So I took a break. I realized my body lacked salt. So I ate a cube of veggie stock. My body started to party as the taste of salt reached my brain. As the climb leveled off, half of the path was covered in deep mud pools, approximately 15 centimeters deep. Trying to get around them took ages. couple hours later, I finally reached the highest point of the day. It's just over 1000 meters above sea level, and for the first time I got out of the dense bush. I found that psychologically hiking in the bush is horrible, as everything looks the same, so you can't see any progress and you have no idea how far you still have to go, for example to reach the summit. A tricky and very steep descent to Browning Hut completed this tiring day, but no time to rest. Tomorrow will be even harder, I think. Today we climbed to 1511 meters, after descent all the way to about 200 meters. At Starville Hut I had a soup with lots of spices and salt for lunch. And of course I left an entry at the hut's intentions book. I realized that Felix and Johannes, whom we had met on the Queen Charlotte track, were only one day ahead. We had left the forest behind us now. Finally we could see where we were going. And the rocky, dry terrain with many bushes at around knee height reminded me very much of the Swiss Alps. So I'm almost at the summit, and I just feel the first raindrops. There it is, our little hut. So this is it, we're leaving this little hut. We had a nice fire yesterday, it was nice and warm, about 25 degrees. But then we let the fire go out in the night. We thought it might contain a bit of the warmth in here, but it didn't at all, so it was freezing cold when we got out here in the morning. So we are heading for Old Man Hut now, but the sky is blue, you can see the moon, which is great. Not much later we disappeared into the rising fog, and sometimes it was hard to see the next pole along the track. We then started to climb Littering Tool, 1643 meters above sea level, and the sun came out again. The climb started in a beech forest and then transformed into a tiring rocky loose terrain, which required a lot of concentration. We then descended through loose and steep rocky slopes to reach the saddle, which connects Littering Tool with Mountain Tool at 1731 meters above sea level. We started to climb same straight away, again all in steep rocky loose terrain, which was extremely tiring. I cooked a big soup for dinner, an unusual combination of lentils, oats, peanut butter, veggie stock, oregano, chili powder and pepper, but it tasted quite good and I really felt full afterwards. Little did I know this would become my daily dinner for the next 2 months. Today we followed the beautiful Wairoa River towards Top Wairoa Hut. The trail runs along the steep sides of the river, which includes some dangerous spots where climbing is needed, which is even more dangerous on days like today, when a lot of rain makes the rocks, soil and leaves very slippery. About 8 to 10 times the path crosses the river, so our feet were constantly wet. We arrived at Top Wairoa Hut at about 2:15 p.m. and had a small lunch break until about 3 p.m. We then continued steeply up the mountain. Fog and later on rain and wind made it rather unpleasant. The worst part, however, was the descent on horribly loose, rocky underground, which made us stumble so badly we couldn't help but making fun of ourselves. It was interesting to see our feelings going from pissed to complete joy and laughter and back. After more than 10 hours of hiking, we finally reached Hunter's Hut, the most beautiful hut we've stayed in so far. After a high often comes a low. I was just too slow today. Not because my body couldn't do it, but because my mind struggled. I got angry at every obstacle, took a break, and then realized I can only overcome it if I keep going. 10 meters further, the same thing, and so on. I asked myself, why am I doing this? I couldn't find an answer. I started to question if I can do it or not. I remembered that quote Henrik and I often made fun of. Do it! Just do it! Yesterday you said tomorrow, so just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. I realized this was only about my mind. I know my body can do it, I kept telling myself. But can my mind? I saw the top of the hill. That was going to be my first success moment today. I quickly reached the top and had half a piece of chocolate to celebrate. I smiled. Chocolate always makes me smile. We crossed 3 rivers that day. We arrived at Red Hill's hut completely soaked, but there was no oven to get warm and dry again. Our feet hurt. We had been walking across the Richmond Range for 8 consecutive days now, only 1 to go. We were really looking forward to an off day in St. Arno. After 1 full day of eat, sleep and repeat, I headed for Nelson Lakes National Park. Without Henrik, as his heel was still swollen quite badly and I didn't want to lose valuable time as I was on a tight schedule. So I decided to catch up with Johannes and Felix, whom we had met again in St. Arno. They were 1 day ahead. It rained a lot, so the track was more like a creek than an actual path, and it even snowed just a bit higher up. I was glad some hikers already had a fire going when I arrived at the hut. I am such an idiot. I just really left my phone at the hut when I left this morning at around 8:30. Hiked for hours, didn't notice, got all the way past Travers Falls, then noticed, searched through all my bags, found out okay I really didn't have it anywhere. Took me probably about half an hour to search through my bags. Then I ran all the way back to the hut, did it in maybe half an hour. Took me more than 2 hours I guess to hike up there. And then I met 2 American guys who stayed with me at the hut, and they told me that the Kiwi family who stayed at the hut too took it to the dock center and they just left half an hour ago. So I kept running for another about half an hour through the forest, and I met them at the trail junction too, and that's quite ironic. Hopeless track. And now of course I gotta walk all the way back to my backpack, which is about I guess like 3 or 4 hours of hiking. If I run it's a bit less of course. Maybe I can half that. It's uphill though, so it will be hard. And then I gotta keep going, and I lost a lot of time. Of course I will probably lose in total about 3 hours in the end. But I'm glad I have my phone back. That's the phone I'm filming on now. I passed the Travers Falls again, and with about 16 additional kilometers in my legs, I kept going, this time slowly with my backpack on again. At least the weather was beautiful, and I could see the snow-covered mountain tops and many streams running down the steep slopes. I reached Upper Travers Hut at around 3 p.m. There was already quite a bit of snow. The steep climb through the snow-covered uneven terrain was difficult, It wasn't really like walking on snow, but more like blindly walking across grass and rocks as the snow layer was too thin and soft, so I just sank through it but couldn't see what I was standing on. I reached Trevor's Saddle after about 2 hours, and the view was very rewarding. As the entire crossing is said to take 6 hours, I had to keep going soon. The descent to Cages as always. At about 8:45 PM I finally reached West Sabine Hut. This day I did about 30 kilometers, but I only got about 14 kilometers closer to Bluff. How frustrating. Yesterday I left the hut relatively early, as I knew it would be a long day, but I had no idea at that point how long it actually would turn out to be. I started at around 8:30 AM, walked in beautiful sunshine on relatively good trails towards Blue Lake Hut. I got there at noon, which was rather quick, and then had a break next to the lake, which is the clearest freshwater lake in the world. And the best thing, I was all by myself. I continued at about 12:45 towards Wild Pass. Soon I was able to see Lake Constance. As the lake fills up the valley to both sides, the trail leads up the steep slope on one side, mostly across loose rocks and snow. It then descends again all the way to the border of the lake. A bit further, the actual pass started out, straight up the side of the valley. Soon I had climbed to above 1,600 meters, where it started to be less steep and pretty much everything was covered in snow. I followed the footsteps Johannes and Felix had left behind earlier today. After a long and tiring ascent, I reached a pass of almost 1,900 meters altitude at around 5 PM. I had a short break to take some photos and have some chocolate and listen to Beautiful Day by U2, because that's how it felt. I then started to descend through the snow, which had been cooked by the sun all day and therefore was wet and heavy, and sometimes I sunk all the way to my hips. Sitting on my bagliner, and it goes down relatively steep, so I'm trying to slide that part. Woo! Woo! Yes! Now we're talking, man! I got through the very steep, high alpine part of the crossing rather quickly, which made me believe I might not get to the hut too late. Well, I was wrong. I still had over 10 kilometers to go, and New Zealand had some surprises left for me. This included 5 river crossings, multiple fields of loose scree, and a badly marked trail. After more than 14 hours of hiking, I could finally see the hut, and there was still light. I talked to Johannes as I had dinner and then went to bed. The next morning we didn't leave until about 10:30. It was already quite warm, the New Zealand sun burning down from the sky. The track was flat as it had never been before. Only a few times we had to cross rivers. We walked along the endless valley, quite empty, and except for one farm with a few horses, no signs of civilization. After about 20 kilometers we turned right into another valley and had a slight ascent to get to N Hut, where we stayed the night. It was a great hut as it was new and had an awesome view. We got up at 6 the next morning and left at 7:30 to get to the Boyle River Outdoor Education Center, 27 kilometers away. We were all quite exhausted from the heat and long distances the last days and were really looking forward to have a hot shower, Wi-Fi and a day off in Boyle. Felix had some blisters on his feet, Johannes a hole in his sock, and I had a runny nose to start off. The sun was extremely strong again, and I had lost my hat 2 days ago when sliding down the snow on my butt, which meant my head didn't get any sun protection at all. When we reached Boyle Flat's hut after 6 hours in the sun and with still 4 hours to go, I felt quite weak and sick. My guts felt like a balloon, and I had cramps in stomach and guts. I went to the toilet, drank some water and lay down in the shade for some minutes. I decided to cover my head with my towel as we kept going. This protected me from the sun rays, but it also insulated and stored the heat like a beanie. As we came by a little stream, I completely soaked my towel in the cold water and wrapped it back around my head. About half an hour later I did the same thing again, and I really started to feel better again. After some more hours and some breaks in between, we finally reached Boyle at about 6:30 p.m, only to find out office hours were until 3 p.m. on Sundays, so there was no one around anymore. What a disappointment. No shower, no Wi-Fi, no kitchen today. The next 24 hours were all about the satisfaction of my cravings in Hanmer Springs. As we arrived at the first hut after Boyle, we were soaked by the rain, and happy, Tim and Catherine, a middle-aged Kiwi couple, had already started a fire. They went on to accompany us for many days and spent many hut nights with us. They showed their respect for us in a prayer, so I want to show my respect for them and tell you what's inspiring to me about this Kiwi couple. Tim and Catherine must be in their late 50s, and except for the Richmond Range, they were planning to do the entire South Island part of the TA. Of course, one wonders how can they manage to do that, as they can't be retired yet, so usually they would need to work. Well, except for if you don't have a normal job. They work in the winter months and quit their jobs in summer. Catherine is trained nurse and Tim is Anglican priest, but they have experience in many different fields, so they can do all kinds of jobs, and as they are very flexible, they could do any job anywhere, even abroad. As they don't possess a lot, have a minimalistic lifestyle and rent their house, they have been able to afford that summer off for 3 years in a row now. And they even managed to put aside plenty of their earnings for their retirement years. I am very much inspired by their flexible minds, dealing with things as they come, be it sunshine or storm, in both metaphorical and literal sense, especially considering their age. We did about 20 kilometers the next day. A big part was along Lake Sumner, but as we mainly walked through dense New Zealand bush, we really only saw the lake once for a very short time. We crossed 2 suspension bridges and arrived at the hut relatively early. We only had to do about 10 kilometers the next day, with a stop at the natural hot springs about halfway. It was around that point where we started to see a routine what we were doing. Some days of hiking, an off day to recover. Some days of hiking, an off day to recover, and so on. We realized that now we had really arrived on the trail, and even though we stayed in another hut every night, it started to feel like it was home. Part of this routine were the daily obstacles, the cozy huts, and most importantly, the good company of fellow hikers along the way. The next day we needed to get across Harper Pass to Lokestream Hut, which is about 15 kilometers. We had lunch still on the way up, not too far from the saddle. Johannes had just finished his prayer as it started to rain, so our lunch break was rather short that day. In many places the trail was washed away, so we just followed the river, often walking on loose rocks in the riverbed and sometimes finding a way around the river through the bush. On that day, at some point, we all switched to Kiwi mode, in which we didn't care about soaked shoes and wet feet anymore, so we just walked right through some streams and at the end crossed out here a river, a proper river, without changing our shoes. Sehr schön. We got to the car park along State Highway 73 and hitched to Arthur's Pass instead of walking across Gold Pass. The next day we decided to do a side trip to Avalanche Peak. Only carrying our day packs, we climbed the 1,100 meters within 2 hours. The view was great and so was the weather, and we even saw a Kia. We hitched out to Bühler the same afternoon as it was free of charge, and that way we could start early the next morning. As I had resupplied with a food parcel of over 10 kgs, I struggled quite a bit the next day, so for a part, Johannes carried my camera including gimbal and tripod while I used his walking sticks. In the afternoon, Felix started to have trouble with his ankle. As we got to the hut, we redefined the purpose of our hike. We had hurried too much and enjoyed too little, wanting to walk every meter of the trail. We stayed a full day at Hamilton Hut, a large, well-equipped hut with a great view, so Felix could recover, and then, instead of 2 days gravel road and 1 night campground and a difficult hitch from Lake Coleridge Lodge, we walked out in northeasterly direction across Castell to State Highway 73 to get a hitch to Methven. Henrik had skipped a section and was already in Methven. I met him at the hostel. It was great to see him. Together we prepared for our feast at Christmas Eve. We were lucky to meet 2 Dutch guys who offered to drop us off at the re-entry point along Rokaya River. We spent an uncomfortable night at Common's hut, the cold wind blowing right through the holes in the thin metal sheets. My nose had been running like a marathon world champion for the last few days, but after that night my entire body felt weak, and Johannes and Felix felt sick too. Nobody had checked the route for today, so we were all surprised by the first 2 river crossings only a few hundred meters from the hut when we left short before 8. The strong current of the stream quickly filled my shoes with tiny rocks. The sun wasn't even up, and the water of the creek we walked in for the next 4 hours was so cold our feet were numb after just a few minutes. Still, I could feel the pain of the tiny pieces of sharp gravel stitching into my bare feet with every step I took. Every time we got out of the river, we were sure to be poked by the awfully painful thorns of one of these beautiful plants. After I stumbled and fell into the river, Johannes generously offered me his walking sticks. I was the weakest link of the chain, and I hated it. As we got away from the river, the mood improved again. We spent the night at the beautiful double hut, which featured a great scenic toilet. The next morning was Christmas Eve, which meant we slept long and then only did an easy but beautiful walk to Manuka Hut. We had a wash in the river and then prepared our Christmas dinner of gnocchi with tomato sauce and parmesan cheese, served with veggies and fried camembert. We also drank our mulled wine, cold, as the outside temperature was hot. The freshly prepared pancakes were the icing on the cake. After dinner we had plenty of time to relax while the sun slowly set behind the mountains. The next morning we left early and did over 30 k's through a beautiful landscape under bright blue sky, all the way to Rangitata River. That night there was no hut for us to sleep in, so I had to sleep in my baby bag. I didn't sleep well at all. I hated the world. Today, we finally got to attempt the crossing of Rangitata River, the largest crossable river of the entire trail. When I thought of river crossings before I hit the trail, for some reason, I always imagined myself fighting through one big stream and then getting dried by the warm sun. Well, the reality is different, and Rangitata didn't make an exception. We spent the entire day crossing many streams in the cold rain. Most of them weren't very spectacular, but made sure we were all nice and wet up to our hips. Except for the last stream of Rangitata, which was a real challenge to cross. After we almost got carried away in one spot, we managed to cross in another one. But Rangitata was only the first half. After a short rinse of our boots, we continued along Bush Street. We shared the 8-bunk hut with another group of 5 hikers that night. We agreed that our group would do a shorter section the first day and stay in Stone Hut, and they would camp at Camp Stream Hut the second day, so we could sleep inside. The 27th of December wasn't really eventful, except for the moment when I lost balance and slipped into a river while crossing it, hopping from rock to rock. The next day was more interesting. as it included Stag Saddle, which at 1,925 meters above sea level marks the highest point of the entire TA. Of course, the day started with an early river crossing before the sun was up. Felix often commented such situations with, "New Zealand always has an ace up its sleeve. You think you'll have an easy day? New Zealand has an ace up its sleeve. You think you'd get to your destination on dry feet? New Zealand has an ace up its sleeve." As we walked towards the first hut in which we originally intended to stay, we came across quite a few hikers. It turned out there had been 11 people sleeping in that hut that night, so we were glad we had stayed in Stone Hut. We reached the saddle at about 1:45, and our phones rang and vibrated like crazy, as there was network coverage up there for the first time since Methven, which meant for the first time since Christmas too. We took some photos, sent some of them to friends and family, talked to a northbounder who had just arrived, and then continued to reach the ridgeline from which we were told there would be an amazing view. And even though expectations were high, I was blown away by the beauty of this place. We could see the stunningly blue Lake Tekapo to our left, the wide Wild Godley River to our feet, behind it like a wall the highest peaks of New Zealand's Southern Alps, including snow-covered Mount Cook, and to the right many more mountains. We spent a long time up there, enjoying the view, and then walked down along the ridgeline on a great trek for some hours.
Look at me with your rubber eyes. I believed in elaborate lies. Now I live today and then tomorrow. We are gonna look at life, we're not covered in fear, and we know we're gonna take it from here. Broken mountains, they can never stop us. So they'll say
From where we left the ridge, it was less than an hour to Campstream Hut, a tiny private hut where we spent the night. The next day we walked about 15 kilometers to the gravel road which led to Tekapo, and then tried to hitch while walking along that road. We tried to find accommodation in Tekapo Archweisel, but online everything was sold out. After about 1.5 hours along the gravel road in the beating sun, Henrik and I got a ride to Tekapo by an Argentinian guy and his Kiwi girlfriend. In Tekapo we got ourselves an ice cream and finally managed to book accommodation for tonight. We got a ride to Twisley quite quickly. At the lodge we had a cold shower as it was around 28 degrees Celsius, and we then went on to buy food. Lots of food. I ate all night and the entire next day, but I still had some fruit left in the end. But for Henrik it was even worse. He had bought too much cheese, chips, cookies, muesli, soy milk, and maybe even some other stuff. We just took it along on the trail the next morning. It was New Year's Eve. Some days later at Stody's hut, we met Mike from Texas, who works in a national park in Alaska for 6 months every summer, maintaining trails and infrastructure. He then travels to a warm place in winter to cheaply live off the money he had earned the summer before. So this time it would be Te Araroa in New Zealand. It sounded really cool, however, he didn't really have a plan for his retirement, other than to stay healthy and work as long as possible, and then to die quickly. From Breast Hill onwards we had a great view of Lake Hawea from high above. After a refreshing dip in Lake Hawea and some sunbathing, we hitched to Wanaka, where we had booked 2 nights in a hostel. I had 2 pizzas for dinner and a 0 day to digest and rest.
Stories till we're gray, so they'll say.
We met Callum and Leah, an Aucklander and French-American girl at Fernburn Hut, the first hut after Wanaka. They had both started in Cape Reinga and met on the trail.
So we're walking through grass, as you might see in my face. Hay fever's kicking in all the way, which makes it only half as much fun.
As we got to Arrowtown, we checked all the accommodations, but everything was fully booked. We got on a bus to Queenstown, and on the way I booked the cheapest available option, a double bed in a 12-bunk dorm for 120 New Zealand dollars. After this expensive night, we continued straight away the next morning, hitching around Lake Wakatipu to get to the Greenstone car park, the trailhead for the next section. Today, we walked along a flat valley past 2 huts about 27 kilometers all the way to Carey's hut. The trek mainly went through open grassland, following a river which was quite beautiful. The hut we arrived in lays right next to the North Mavora Lake and features a small beach. Of course, I had to go for a swim. we met Tyler, a 25-year-old American, quite skinny, very calm and almost introvert. He was a very light tramper, which kind of fit his look and character. However, I was surprised when he told me he spent 4 years in the US Army after he almost dropped out of high school, and that he had done the PCT, AT and many more long distance hikes before.
Henrik, on a scale from 1 to 10, how waterproof is your jacket?
Like a 2. 2 or 3.
And how well does the water cooling system work?
Oh, you mean this one?
Yeah.
This brings big holes in here. Which does not ventilate my the heat at all. Right?
Yeah, but there's water getting in, so you stay cool anyway. It's pretty good. Pretty good rain jacket there.
We arrived at the road to Te Araroa and got a ride quite quickly. In the hostel, I decided to book a tour to Doubtful Sound for the next day. We were back on the trail at around noon the next day. A lot of the track went through the forest and was quite muddy, and the rest was through swampy grassland, where it was hard to spot the poles because they were lower than the surrounding vegetation. Like Fjordland, this region receives a lot of rain, which leads to the incredibly green vegetation. At first sight, this may just look beautiful to you, but believe me, after a while it just feels like walking in a huge, endless maze. But I guess that's what we're all here for, escaping civilization and getting lost in nature. Some trampers compared these sections to the Appalachian Trail, the Green Tunnel. Today we did 39 kilometers and spent the night at Birchwood Station, hosted by the very friendly Sarah and Dean. As we arrived at Merivale Hut the next day, we decided to hitch out to a Tau for resupply. We got stuck and had to stay the night. 2 days later we headed for the muddy longwood forest.
Accompanied by Callum and Millicent, an incredibly tough yet very big-hearted French girl.
Man, Henrik, alles musst du kaputt machen. Gibt's doch gar nicht. Jetzt schau dir mal den Schrotthaufen an.
I started to
hier.
realize more and more that with every step I took, I got one step closer to the finishing line. I didn't know whether that was a good or a bad thing, as I had grown to deeply enjoy my time on the trail. And then suddenly,
Woohoo! That's the sea!
leaving the trail meant to leave a routine, leave a country, and leave behind people I had grown to like very much. But I had some great things to look forward to. My journey would continue to China, Mongolia, and Russia, and the trail was gonna end, whether I liked it or not, so it was up to me to make the most out of the last few days on trail. After 2 days in the muddy longwood forest, we arrived at Colac Bay, only 80 kilometers left to Bluff. Callum, Leah and Millicent wanted to accomplish this within 14 hours, and I aimed to split it into 2 sections. The first one stretching 45 to 50 kilometers from Colac Bay to Invercargill. As we started, the tide was just about at its lowest point. We didn't know as we had not checked, and that was a big mistake. At the beginning, it was no big deal, as we still had plenty of space to walk along the beach. We reached Riverton before noon. Still, Henrik wanted to stay, so we split up after a snack and I continued. I guessed that we must have been past high tide at that point, so the water would be going out now. However, as I was walking along the beach, I realized I was wrong, so I checked, and it was still about 2 hours until high tide. I decided to get away from the beach and fight my way through the bushes to the gravel road on farmland nearby. As I got back to the beach, I took off my boots for a bit as I started to get blisters on my feet. In Invercargill I got very sick and I had to stay for 3 full days. On the 26th of January, being 80% fit again, I walked the last few kilometers to Bluff. This is it, I did it. It was my last chance, as my flight left from Christchurch 2 days later.